pro wrestling world is still processing and dealing with the shocking loss and death of the legendary Hulk Hogan this past Thursday at the age of 71. Today's podcast is going to be largely centered around the Hulkster and his career and the complicated legacy that he left behind. I want to thank all of you for being here today. It's been a weird week. A lot of people are processing this news, dealing with this news, reacting to this news in all sorts of different ways. We've seen a lot of good and bad on social media from all sorts of different types of fan bases, and it's been a weird week. WWE had a lovely tribute for Hulk Hogan last night on Smackdown, as we knew that they would. I kind of knew going into that whatever sort of video package they were going to do for Hogan would probably be one of the best ones they ever did. And it was. I don't know if it's the best, but it's definitely up there with Triple H narrating it. And everybody on the stage for the Big 10 Bell salute. WWE flying in a lot of Hogan's closest friends, including an absolutely distraught Jimmy Hart, who you really just felt for last night. You could see him openly sobbing. And Jimmy Hart's like in his 80s, and him and Hogan were pals. They're best friends. Duggan was there. B. Brian Blair, Ted DiBiase, Briscoe, Slaughter, I believe I saw out there. And pretty nice tribute from WWE last night on SmackDown. Also, the entire wrestling world has been reacting to Hogan's passing. We've been seeing it from everybody. There's really nobody that's been silent about it, except for AEW, which I'm hoping they throw up a graphic on Collision tonight. We'll talk about that later. But for the most part, everybody in the entire wrestling community and world, fans and wrestlers alike, have had some sort of reaction or something to say about this monumental death. When it comes to pro wrestlers dying, as wrestling fans, we're used to that. We go through it every Tuesday. It's extremely common, almost too common, disturbingly common for us to lose a lot of our childhood heroes at early ages and whatnot. Hogan, however, he died at age 71, and his lifestyle may have played a role in his early-ish death. But for the most part, Hogan did live a long life. But he is, of all the deaths that we've experienced, he's the biggest one. And we've lost Bruno, we've lost superstar Billy Graham, we've lost Dusty Piper, we've lost some icons, and I mean icons. But when you look at the broad spectrum of the pro wrestling business, there's no figure that stands higher than Hulk Hogan. And this is the biggest death that wrestling has ever experienced and that we've ever experienced together. We talked about this for years. There's going to come a day when Hulk Hogan passes away. And I'm going to have to sit here and, try to manage all of these different emotions that I had, because if you're my age, if you're in your mid to late 40s or early 40s to late 40s, you grew up with Hogan as champion. I grew up with Hogan as champion right in the beginning. Some other fans might have came along later when he was in the 90s or whatever, but I saw him right from the moment he got to WWE. I was watching him before he was WWE champion. And then he beat the Iron Sheik and went on through the 80s to become a very, very important hero of mine from ages like 6 to 11 or 6 to 10, somewhere in there. It was like a 5 or 6 year period, of my childhood in the 80s where Hulk Hogan was a really, really big deal to me. And later on, in the 90s, I grew out of him. I moved on to Bret Hart and enjoyed other types of wrestlers a little bit more than Hogan. And then as, Hogan moved into his personal life outside of the ring, he really just grew to be an unlikable person in my eyes. And, I just never really cared for him. But, in that stage of my life. But it's hard to, to reconcile the two because he was such a big deal to me as a kid. But as an adult, he was a profound disappointment. And so, folks who are my age are probably, a lot of us are kind of wrestling with that in our heads. All right, you got to acknowledge the icon that he is, but you also have to acknowledge the shithead that he was, and balancing that is difficult. Where, younger fans who might be 22 years old, they don't remember shit. They weren't even around when Hogan was in the ring, winning championships, doing any of that. So they have no personal memories there. So you're seeing a wide array and wide variety of responses and reactions. And a lot of it has to do with your age. And how old you are. Young people tend to be acting a certain way. Older people do too. And then you have, on the other side of that coin, some of the personal, and uglier things about Hulk Hogan's life and the people that he has offended and whatnot. And you've seen such a wide range of just different types of emotions over the last 2 days since Hulk Hogan's death. And that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Hulk Hogan and his career. And like I said, the legacy that he left behind. We're going to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's going to be, probably going to gobble up at least half of this podcast today. And then we will save time to do a quick recap of last night's Smackdown, which was pretty much a nothing show outside of the Hogan tribute and pretty tremendous Cody Rhodes promo on John Cena. And of course, we had the big tag match main event, which resulted in a big SummerSlam match being added to the card. So not much going on Smackdown last night. Dynamite was somewhat newsworthy. We have some injury news coming out of that and a big title match scheduled for next week as we head into Forbidden Door. And a couple of other news tidbits, some injury notes on Jay White and Colton Gunn. We've got an update on Karrion Kross and Scarlett's contract and a few other small news tidbits. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about the Hulkster today. And I want to thank everyone who joined us on Thursday. Right after I learned of his death, I felt like I just needed to come up live on YouTube. We went live for about an hour and 20 minutes, and it was not structured at all. I had no notes whatsoever. I just threw up a thumbnail, and we went live, and we just kind of rambled about the Hulkster. We talked about his life, his career. I talked about the complicated legacy that he's leaving behind, my complicated emotions, my complex emotions, what I'm going through in my head, because as most of you know, I've been very vocal about my disapproval of Hulk Hogan and his behavior over the past 15 years. And, I always wondered when the day came, how we were going to talk about Hulk Hogan. And I wanted to come up on Thursday just to kind of freestyle some thoughts. Basically, as the thoughts were entering my mind, I was spitting them out. And so thank you to everyone who was here. We made a few bucks as well, and I wanted to donate that to charity. And I decided, I made kind of a mistake on that, and I thought to myself, well, I've already given to UNCF before, United Negro College Fund. So what could we do? How could we take money generated from Hulk Hogan's name and give it to communities that he may have offended with some of his past comments? I'm like, Black Lives Matter. Let's just do that. But some people pointed out, hey, Greg, that might have not been the best charity. There is some sketchiness going on there behind the scenes. I really wasn't aware of that. I read up a little bit about it. Mostly accusations, nothing definite, but fair enough. Fair enough. Should have stayed with my original thought. So in order to, just kill all the backlash from that, I made another donation for the same amount to the United Negro College Fund, and hopefully that will rectify what we did with the other one. But I didn't put it on social media, didn't want to do that or take credit for it and get any shit from anybody for trying to make a meme or whatever the fuck. Just wanted to try to do something nice with the money that you guys so graciously donated to the channel. So ended up making 2 donations on Thursday, but just felt like that was the right thing to do. We did the same thing for the first couple of Saudi shows. We donated to women's charities. We've donated to Sammy's charity before. So, that's nothing new here, but I do apologize for maybe not thinking that all the way through, even though I think my heart was in the right place type of thing. So anyway, Thursday's video was ad-free, and we made 2 different donations in Hulk Hogan's name to charities. And I want to thank everybody who was here with us on Thursday for, what was just a little bit over an hour and just watching me say things about Hulk Hogan. Today is going to be much more organized because I wanted to formulate, my thoughts on Hulk Hogan and his career and be able to speak about those on the podcast this weekend in more of an official capacity. Thursday was just me, my raw reaction to news that, I guess I wasn't expecting. We've heard news and rumblings and rumors of Hulk Hogan's physical state for a few weeks now. There was some rumors that he was on his deathbed that were squashed. And so you knew something was going on with him because we haven't seen him in a couple of months. But still, reading that news Thursday morning was like, whew, man, oh man. So that's kind of what we're going to be here talking about this afternoon. Happy Saturday to you. Welcome back to another Saturday podcast. And this should be an interesting one, that's for sure. Before we get going here, let me just say hello to everybody who is here in the chat. Do me a favor. Thumbs up button, please smash it. All super chats will be answered today. Memberships, of course, are open. And if you're not a subscriber of this channel, please become one. I would definitely appreciate it. Just a couple of quick shout outs here before we get into stuff here, in case this tends to be a longer podcast, because I only have 2 hours set aside for this, and then I've got to head off to work. But good to see Zane G and Melissa and Mike Rouse. We got Zach Goller in the house. What's up, dude? Yes, I will be interested in doing a video. I'm busy for the next week or so, but pretty soon I'll be up for that, and we should be getting SummerSlam tickets this week. If any of you want to join me, Elizabeth, and Zach at SummerSlam, shoot me a DM in the next couple of days. Zach, let's shoot for early week. Let's do Monday or Tuesday and get those tickets for Survivor Series so we can get that out of the way. And any of you want to join us at Petco Park in San Diego, shoot me a DM. We'll work it out. We'll get some seats together, and we can just Venmo each other, whatever we got to do there. And if you're interested, let us know. David Brown, good to see you. Ricky Zalvadar as well. We got Zane G, Gilbert, Intimidators in the house. William Cullen, Serge, Colin Wright, Juwan Hill, Isaac, Sonic Plays. William, I did get you. Lee, the autistic Lego fan, good to see you. Ben Espinoza, Phoenix Reborn. We also have Mohammed. We have Ryan Adams, K-Dog's Kennel. Lando is I. We are pro wrestling. And Ryan, thank you for that. Dom as Mr. Money in the Bank winner in 2026, just for fun. Oh my God, Dominic is a briefcase holder. Sign me up. Zoo Tours, good to see you. Shell Shock as well. Gilbert and Spartan Sprinkles chiming in with $5 for us. No, y'all don't understand. Hulk Hogan, who had an 11-inch peen, died. Terry Bollea, who did not have an 11-inch peen, is still alive and well. Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea, we talk about them as the same person. But Hulk Hogan was the character that Terry Bollea played. But Hogan, there was a lot of those two entities, the real Terry Bollea and the fictional Hulk Hogan were really interwoven together and were the same person. He was Hulk Hogan everywhere he went out. It was the sleeveless shirt. It was the bandana. He was Hulk no matter where he went. You didn't see him going out and about looking like my ass, dressed in some shorts, flip-flops, and a T-shirt. No, Hogan was Hogan everywhere he went, and he took that very seriously. And we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And believe it or not, there is a lot of good to talk about. And I thought about that a lot over the last couple of days, because one thing I find gross, and you guys, I'm sure are aware of this, who've been watching me for years. I've been very critical always of Hulk Hogan. Even in those early days, I had a couple of those, rants on him that you guys loved. But never once in any of those situations would I have ever said something like, I can't wait until he dies so I can go piss on his grave. I cannot wait until he dies so I can celebrate and throw a party. No matter how unsavory someone is, I really find that to be extremely disrespectful and extremely gross. You guys know I don't like Hulk Hogan. I've been extremely vocal about that. He's a liar. He's a racist. He's a Trump supporter. There's all sorts of things to not like about him. But he is not a monster. He's not a sexual perverted predator like Ric Flair. He's not a murderer like Jimmy Snuka or Chris Benoit. He is someone who has said some horrible things without his knowledge, and he did a terrible job trying to atone for his mistakes. He just comes off as a kind of a crappy person, is all. Even the lies he tells are mostly victimless lies. When you hear Hulk Hogan in interviews, one thing I'll say good about him is that he never is bitching. You never hear him complain. You know how a lot of the old timers just have all sorts of shitty things to say about the new generation and today's crop and how they don't sell and they don't do this. Hogan, while he's had critical things to say about wrestlers in the past, Mick Foley and a few others here and there, he never speaks from a position rooted in rage or anger or bitterness. He never goes out of his way to trash other people. You don't hear that a lot from him. Hogan is mostly about making everything about himself and how he can make himself sound. He never really cares enough to put anybody else over unless it's Andre the Giant or to trash anybody, because nobody is really on his radar other than himself. So one thing about Hogan, it's like, I would never tell any member of the black community how to process Hulk Hogan's loss. It is not my job to police how you guys are reacting to this. That is your business. And I am in no position to tell anybody what they should or should not be doing as it relates to Hogan. But I also think that posting memes, celebrating, making fun of his death, you have every right to do that. But I find that just a little bit kind of disturbing, you know? Yeah, he wasn't a good person, you know, but there have been far worse. Ric Flair's worse. There have been far worse people in the wrestling business who have done way worse than Hogan has and were forgiven. How many times has the cops been called to Hulk Hogan's house? And they've had to drag his wife out of there with 2 black eyes. You know, how many run-ins with the law? How many DUIs has he had? You know, how many other people's lives has he put in danger? You know, think about Sonny, who's rotting away in jail right now. Think about what Benoit did, what Jimmy Superfly Snuka did, what so many wrestlers chronicled in Dark Side of the Ring did. You know, and you measure up their mistakes to Hogan's, there's a lot worse that don't have the hate attached to their name that he does. And I think he just offended so many people with especially that racist rant. And I really think the game changer was that apology. I truly believe that if Hogan would have structured that apology better, it would have been a totally different story for him. But instead of apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, and I'm going to make it my life's work to make it up to everybody that I offended and become a better person, instead, he apologized for getting caught. And he lectured the rest of the locker room, including many black wrestlers who were in there, to be careful and watch out for the cameras. How do you think that made them feel? That's why I'm not going to sit here and say, you should react this way or you should react that way. But I don't think that I don't think it makes you any better of a person to celebrate that he died, you know? And like I said on Thursday, you know, we're going to be honest about his career, incredibly honest, but celebrating that he's dead, making fun of his death, posting AI videos of you taking a shit on his grave. That's all incredibly weird behavior. And I don't think anybody should be being like that. You know, we should all have forgiveness in our hearts, you know, even if he didn't have any in his, you know, and I just think kind of like life's too short, especially now that he's passed away, you know, to hang on to these things now. Obviously, he's going to have that stigma attached to his legacy for the end of time, and that's his own fault. That's his own doing, and I feel like he deserves a lot of that. But, you know, to harp on that, especially after he's dead, he can't do anymore. He can't lie anymore. He can't be any more racist. You know, that's all done. And everybody is individually, you know, making their own decisions on how to balance who he was with his legacy and his wrestling career. You know, and some fans, I don't think about anything except his wrestling career. Some fans don't think about anything but his personal life. Some fans think about both. And all we can do here is do our best to acknowledge the career that he had, the mark that he made on the business, and the legacy that he left behind. And that's all we're here to do today. You know, but one thing we're certainly never going to do here on this podcast at all for any wrestler is celebrate their death. It's, you know, I mean, I think Flair is a worse person, objectively worse person than Hulk Hogan. You know, he's somebody who feels like, or I guess who believes that, you know, being a perverted sexual predator who feels entitled enough to just whip out his hammer in front of women all the time, he feels that that is an endearing quality. He thinks that's a quality about himself, you know, and some of that stuff, you hear the bitterness in a lot of wrestlers' voices and some of the things they say. I try to think about some of the things that Hogan has said, and I'm like, you know, he's never pissed. He's never ranting and raving like Jim Cornette about some blood that he saw in AEW, and he fucking cries about it for 3 fucking hours while 200,000 little incels whack off to it. You know, nothing that he does is ever outwardly taking a shit on the business. I feel like Hogan could have done more when he was in the business, you know, and he could have been, you know, maybe a little bit more supportive of what's going to be coming after him while he was there. But in terms of after he's been in the ring and his retirement, it's nice to hear him not be like an Undertaker or a Bubba Dudley, just a pontificating douche who always got something snotty to say, who's so desperate to want to sound smart. and they just overanalyze and they overthink and they sputter out these stupid opinions like they're just agitated that they're not involved in wrestling anymore. They're bitter. They're jealous, and they're not supportive of the new crop of who the current, or how the current product looks. They have a lot of complaints. And for everything Hogan said and all of the lies that he told, you very rarely heard him talking like that, And so those are some things that we're going to talk about today, as it relates to Hulk Hogan, who did die on Thursday at age 71 due to an apparent cardiac arrest. He was pronounced dead at the hospital after medics were called to his home. He was rushed to the hospital and was pronounced dead there. So I guess cardiac arrest is what did him in there. And, he's had an outpouring of support ever since. And last night on Smackdown, we're going to be talking about Smackdown later, but last night on Smackdown, they had a really, really lovely tribute to Hulk Hogan. They opened up the show with everybody on the stage, Triple H there front and center, and said a few words about Hulk Hogan. They flew in Jimmy Hart, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jerry Briscoe, Sergeant Slaughter was there. I saw B. Brian Blair, who was a good friend of Hulk's. No Beefcake, no Bischoff. But a few of, the people that Hogan had history with were there along with the rest of the roster. And they did a big 10-bell salute, and they had a really nice video package narrated by Triple H, which is about 6 or 7 minutes long, very long and very good. Another thing I will say about last night's SmackDown is the crowd was respectful. You got to remember the last time we saw Hulk Hogan, or his last wrestling appearance, was in L.A., and he got booed out of the building. I mean, booed badly. And there was part of me that was worried last night on SmackDown when they ran the tribute that you would hear some boos. And I think that everybody just kind of put all that aside for one night, and the crowd was respectful, and I was happy to hear that. So very, very nice and touching tribute from WWE last night. So far, AEW has remained silent. As we know, Tony Khan was never a big fan of Hulk Hogan's. He banned him from ever appearing in any AEW events, along with Linda. And once Hulk Hogan died, everybody was sharing their memories or tributes or acknowledging it in some way. And AEW was completely no-sold the entire thing. And they've been getting some criticism for that. I don't really care if they acknowledge him or not. I'm surprised that they haven't. But you have to understand the position Tony Khan's in. He put himself in the position of banning Hogan. So, and saying some negative things about him and his wife. So if AEW were to post a tribute or a rest in peace graphic, all you would get is hate under that. Oh, how dare you, after what you said about him, how dare you say rest in peace. So he's in a lose-lose here, either way. If they post something about Hogan, how dare you, slobbering little incels. And then if he doesn't post anything, people are also mad. And I understand that, oh my gosh, I'm a little bit shocked as well that AEW hasn't said anything, but we have a Collision coming up in a couple hours. Why don't we wait and see if anything gets said there? Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but maybe AEW is trying to think of the best way to acknowledge this as well. Look, we can't ignore it, but, we can't speak about him like he was an AEW wrestler. He has no AEW history whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, he was banned for the company. And so if I'm Tony Khan, I'm giving him a graphic before Collision. I'm at least doing that, but to completely no-sell it makes you guys look like you don't care, which is fine if they don't, but this is a large part of wrestling. There would be no AEW, arguably, without a Hulk Hogan. We talked about that a lot on Thursday. Remove him from wrestling history. What kind of business are we looking at right now? So I think AEW should say something. They might still. But for all you fans out there, or not you fans, but for all the people out there, and it's always men, males, boys, for those that have spent the last 2 days not thinking about the legacy of Hulk Hogan, but instead obsessing over AEW's lack of response, here is a newsflash. You don't give a single solitary fuck whether or not they acknowledge him or not. You are happy that they're not because it gives you ammunition in your fragile and lonely male war that you are fighting against absolutely nobody. These fragile males, these womanless, hairy, smelly fucks are always bitching every day, all day about Tony Khan, crying like girls about him in one form or another. So for them to act like they're offended that AEW hasn't said anything about Hulk Hogan, go fuck yourself. You are not offended at all. You're not angry. You're happy. You're happy that you get to load your little gun with more ammunition, to fire, So what are they going to say, tonight if AEW posts a graphic on Collision? Oh, they took them long enough, So no matter what they do, it doesn't matter if they acknowledge the death or they don't acknowledge the death, the same little incels are going to behave the same way. They're going to find something negative to say about it because that's a priority to them. I personally think it's a little weird that AEW hasn't said anything yet, but I also think they probably still will. But the last thing I'm doing is obsessing about it because I have, what's it called? Checks notes. Oh yeah, a life. If you have one of those, you tend not to care about some stupid shit like that. So AEW hasn't said anything yet. I personally believe that they should, but I'm not enraged over it. I've not been obsessing about it nonstop for the past 48 hours because I got better shit to do and better shit to think about. So we will see if AEW does give Hulk Hogan any sort of tribute tonight, or maybe if they wait until Wednesday on their flagship show when they can have a little bit more eyeballs on it. But the fact that nothing has come up on social media at all is, yes, it's surprising, but let's stop pretending that it's the end of the fucking world because it's not. And we also knew that no matter what AEW said or didn't say, WWE was going to have a tremendous, I knew going into Smackdown last night that it was going to be one of the most touching tributes they've ever done. And it was. It really was. In terms of the career of Hulk Hogan, like I said, we're going to talk about the good and the bad and the ugly. And I think we need to start with the good. Let's start with recently. Didn't he recently just save someone from a car accident? The car tipped over, someone was trapped inside, he pulled him out. Hero. And this was just recently that Hulk Hogan was involved in this. Another thing I will say positively about Hulk Hogan is that I sometimes felt like he acted irresponsibly and he wasn't doing his legacy and reputation any favors with, some of his personal behavior. But a lot of that was, after the Hogan Knows Best show started and whatnot. Prior to that and even after that and even during that, Hulk Hogan has always been very, very true to his character, protective of his character, and appreciative of his fans. He always meets him. He's doing meet and greets left and right. There's always, touching videos of, him and some kid, doing the Hulkamania shtick or whatever. He always was relatively decent to his fan base. And he would meet fans a lot, interact with fans a lot. He took his role, his character seriously, and he did his best, for the most part to protect that. Every time he was out in public, he was the Hulkster. The only time he wasn't the Hulkster is when he found himself in court, during the steroid trial or during the Gawker stuff. He was more Terry Bollea. But every other time we've seen Hulk Hogan in public, he is Hulk Hogan. The glasses, the bandana, the pythons, he's doing the whole thing. And I always felt like he was, really, really true to that. And even if it didn't seem like it, I believe that he was really appreciative of his fans. And you think about what he did to get the ball rolling in the 80s, getting on the map in the AWA, and Vern Gagne being too scared to put the belt on him. Then he gets the gig in Rocky III. That was his big break. Then he comes back to WWE, and transitional champion Sheik is sitting there with the belt, and Hogan beats him on January 23rd, 1984 in Madison Square Garden, and wins the WWE Championship, and would go on to hold that for over 4 years, his first run. 1984 to 1988 was incredible. And during that time, man, the wrestling business changed so drastically in that short span of 4 years. Because when he first won that title, in 1985 and 1986, I think they had 4 different world championships. He won the green one. Then he had the smaller, red one. Then he had a different, more silver one. Then he had the 86 belt. Then it was the Winged Eagle. There was so many different variations of Hogan's early championship. And the business was, being a lot of TV was produced in the dimly lit Madison Square Garden or dimly lit Boston Garden or Spectrum. And in the next few years, as we got into 1986 and then 1987, and then especially 1988 and 89, once you started hitting those years, the business was becoming a lot more colorful, a lot more vibrant. And it didn't have kind of the dark sort of dreary look that it had previously had in the 70s and the early 80s. It was starting to brighten up. It was being geared towards kids. There was action figures, ice cream bars, cartoons, and you have to credit Hulk Hogan with literally all of that. All of that. Without Hulk Hogan, the only big-time babyface Vince McMahon had was Jimmy Superfly Snuka. He was their Hogan. And had Hogan not come around, I think Vince would have tried to make Snuka the star. Even before Hogan came around, I remember being at the lunch table, kids saying Superfly. Superfly was, I would hear his name a lot. I would see it in magazines, and, I was aware of Snuka, but of course Snuka had his own issues, and, he took the life of someone as well, so Snuka was super over, and he was definitely the most over babyface WWE had in the early 80s there. And if Hogan wouldn't have came in, I think Vince would have tried to go with Snuka, and just who knows where the business would be. NWA might have taken off. Flair might have been, he already kind of was in a lot of people's minds the top guy, but I think NWA might have been slightly more popular than WWE. It was Hogan's character. It was his persona. It was his larger than life aura. To me, when I was a kid, I was playing with like the He-Man action figures. He-Man to Hulk Hogan was a very easy transition for me. They were kind of the same. Just two jack dudes, super tanned jack dudes who fought for what was right, ultimate baby faces, ultimate heroes. And so for me, I used to play with my He-Man. I used to have matches with He-Man and Hulk Hogan and the LJN figure and stuff, So it was all that stuff in the 80s, I think, can be directly credited to Hulk Hogan. And don't forget, he was a part of the biggest wrestling show of all time, Pontiac, Michigan, my birthplace. WrestleMania 3, body slams Andre the Giant in front of 90,000 people in a moment that is etched and immortalized in history forever and will never be forgotten. And he did that 3 years into his title run, would go on to hold the title for another year after that. He really carried the company on his back from 1984 to 1990, even when he wasn't champ. When Savage won the belt in 88 and held it for that year, Hogan was still the face of that company. He was still in every main event. Every main event. Even WrestleMania 4, when he wasn't wrestling in the main event, he was still in the fucking main event. He hit DiBiase with a chair, helped Savage win, and celebrated with him in the ring. SummerSlam 88, right there next to Savage. Survivor Series 88, right there next to Savage. So even when Hogan wasn't champion, he was the face of the company. He was responsible for the houses. He made everyone money. And I know in those early days, a lot of the boys liked Hogan. Hogan didn't have like this nasty reputation of being an asshole or a douche or hard to get along with. Hogan, for the most part, especially in the 80s, was one of the boys. He'd go out, he'd have fun, he'd party with them. He was well liked in those days, especially because he was making everyone money. They were making money because he was there. Hulk Hogan is on the card. That means you got a sellout house. That means your paycheck at the end of the night is going to be higher. And people went in the locker room every night after the show, walk up to Hogan, shake his hand, thank you for the house, brother. He did all that. There was nobody else doing that other than him. Sure, WWE had some stars. You had the Savages and you had the Andres and you had plenty of other guys there, but nobody was drawing that. Everybody was making their money because of Hulk Hogan. And for those first, 10 years there, 83 to 93, I think most of the wrestlers were fine with Hogan being there because he was bringing in and generating more money for them and their families. But once you got into the 90s and stuff, and Hogan, was always kind of calling his own shots and whatnot. But, when you're making so much money, what do you care? But then when you get into the 90s and you got the creative control stuff and all of that, some of that sort of changed. But, in those 6 years there from, 84 or maybe 84 to like 91, it was all Hogan. Even when the Warrior beat him, I understood why he had to win the championship back at WrestleMania 7. That didn't upset me. Vince did what he had to do there. He put the title on the Warrior, but Warrior wasn't drawing the business that Hogan was. So he went back to Hogan, went back to what makes them money. Let's try to squeeze another year out of Hulk if we can. And they did until WrestleMania 8 and he left. So even the WrestleMania 7 win, even though that was one of the weaker WrestleManias, I still feel like that was a sign that Hulkamania was still alive and well because he was still, even in 1991, in the landscape of wrestlers that WWE has on the roster, he is the one that's going to bring them the most revenue, the most money. And they went back to him. I loved the the Mega Powers angle when Savage held the belt. I appreciated him putting over the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. Those are all positives, to me. And, Warrior, Hogan never really even got his rematch. I mean, until WCW, he had to make that right. But the fact that he wasn't politicking for a rematch to win his belt back in WWE really surprised me. I really wish they would have done that rematch at WrestleMania 7. I think it would have been tremendous. But the fact that he put someone over in the attempt, to help the business move on to the next chapter, ultimately it not working out, and Hogan would go on to remain on top and win world titles for another 12, count them, years after that. I think, appreciated the effort in the moment at WrestleMania 6. And I feel like that's one of Hulk Hogan's greatest moments, was in the loss. I remember watching that as a kid. I don't know if the word's butterflies or what, but my heart, there was something in me that felt funny when Hogan presented the belt to the Warrior and they had that hug. I'm like, I've never seen anything like this before. I've never seen Hogan in this way. He just got beat. I've never even seen him be beat legit before, ever. I mean, as this Hogan, I did as a heel, but as this Hogan, this was something that was very, very surreal to see him be pinned and then to hand the championship to someone else and hug him. I'm like, as a kid, that was when I started learning about sportsmanship and stuff, It's like, yeah, if somebody beats you, you shake their hand, good game, And it was like, I was blown away by that. It was one of his best moments, because I thought it was just such a great way to lose the title and to, pass sort of the torch, even though it didn't pan out to be the way I think WWE intended. The moment, I think, is one that I still appreciate. And, he became a household name. He was a household name back in the day before internet and social media and TikToks and shit going viral. If you did not watch pro wrestling, you knew who Hulk Hogan was. And think about the power that took to get over in that way and to get noticed, because pro wrestling was only on for like an hour or two a week. That was it. Plus, he had magazines, but Hogan was a worldwide celebrity. He was in movies. He was on talk shows. He was larger than life. Everybody knew who Hulk Hogan was. If you never watched a wrestling match ever, and somebody said, do you know who Hulk Hogan is? In the 1990s, you're going to say, yeah, I do know who that is. And that even more so then is more impressive than somebody doing it now. I believe John Cena is a household name. The Rock is a household name. But think about what those guys have done and the exposure that they had. Hogan getting over in that way and becoming a household name, with 1980s technology is pretty amazing. And he was, a great ambassador for wrestling. He met troops. He met little kids, Make-A-Wish kids, visited the troops overseas. He did a lot of that stuff. And I don't think that we should just automatically forget that. I don't like Hogan. I'm gonna repeat that and remind everybody that over and over. I was not a fan of Hogan, but I'm also honest, and I'm never gonna bullshit myself, into thinking that these good things, he didn't do them, or to try to downplay them or anything like that, because that's silly and that's dishonest. It's disingenuous. These are things that he did. These are things that he accomplished. And like I said, he got along with most of the boys. Even Bret Hart liked him. Bret Hart has nothing good to say about him now, but back in the day, Bret Hart, like I said, all the boys liked him. Bret Hart painted him a big picture when he left. Went out drinking with him a few times. All the boys appreciated what Hulk gave. It wasn't until the later years, maybe hanging around too long, then the creative control stuff. That doesn't work for me, brother. A few too many instances of that. Okay, we're over you, Terry. But, up until that point, Hogan was respected. Even his jump to WCW, I view as a positive. I don't think Hulk Hogan did anything shitty there. As a matter of fact, he saved Vince's ass in the steroid trial right before he debuted. It was just business. He jumped to WCW for business, the same way he jumped to WWE for business after the AWA. He did the same thing to Vince that he did to Vern. Although I think he screwed Vern over worse, because he was scheduled to work with Bockwinkel on a loop. And then he started no-showing Christmas night shows and whatnot in '83 and headed off to WWE. So at least with WWE, it's not like he's no-showing advertised matches or anything like that. He was done with them. And he went to WCW. And at first, that was a major thing for them, because WCW still looked like an extremely distant number two. They seemed rinky-dink, low budget. None of their TV was produced like shit. And even in the night, even when Hogan was there in the height of the NWO, I still think their production, values were nowhere near the caliber or quality of WWE. But Hogan arriving in WCW made them a big deal instantly. He had the ticker tape parade at Disney, signed his contract. By this point, Mean Gene is there, Bobby is there, a bunch of other people from WWE is there, and more would follow. And that Bash at the Beach event with Ric Flair, that was a huge deal. That was a sellout crowd. Where was it? Orlando? Hot crowd. And when you watch that match, it wasn't even bad. They put that match at WrestleMania 8, it would have been fine. I'm happy we got Savage and Flair at WrestleMania 8, but that Hogan-Flair match, Bash at the Beach, like considering this stage of the life both guys were in at the time, that was not a bad match. Crowd was into it. People were, Hulkamania was reborn there for a couple of years in WCW. And I look at that as a positive. And then another positive is that when that red and yellow version of Hulkamania, who at this point is off the gas, I've always said there's two Hogans. There's dark eyebrow Hogan and light eyebrow Hogan. And the dark eyebrow Hogan is leaner. He's taller. He's skinnier. Off the gas, obviously. And when that started wearing out its welcome, because Hogan coming in WCW was really surreal, even for me, I was like, never thought I'd see this day. That's crazy. But once he's there, now he's champ for a year. He's doing stupid Dungeon of Doom shit and all the little lame shit that Hogan's doing. Fans started growing tired of it. It was a tired, played out shtick, and I think fans were looking for a change. And that's when Hulk Hogan formed the NWO in 1996. We're going to have our 30th anniversary of that next year, next summer. So right around 29 years ago, Hogan, of course, formed the NWO at Bash at the Beach with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and he reinvented the business again. And one of the most fascinating, I think, things, one of the most fascinating and unbelievably unique and impressive things about Hulk Hogan and his career is that he was the centerpiece of the two biggest boom periods wrestling has ever seen. And he did that once as a babyface and once as a heel. And that's something I've said for years about Hulk Hogan, is that as a performer, he was as good of a babyface as he was a heel. As good as he was as performing that character of the superhero, he was equally as good at performing the character of the evil leader of the NWO, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, just the ultimate douchebag, ultimate heel, cowardly, chicken shit, little bitch. And he played it perfectly. As perfectly as he played I can never be defeated, I'm impervious to pain, superhero Hulk Hogan. And the fact that he was right in the middle of those two periods, rock and wrestling as the immortal Hulk Hogan, and then into the mid-90s and into the Attitude Era as Hollywood Hulk Hogan, playing those characters equally well and drawing about the same amount of money in both instances. Putting 9 years in WWE, 8 or 9 years in WWE and about 6 in WCW was really, really impressive. And you can't, nobody can say that. That's something that's never going to be duplicated again. When you think about Rock and John Cena, they're kind of just the face of one era, but Hogan was the face of two, about 10 years apart. Think about who 86 Hogan was, or think about who 87, think about 87 Hogan. Create that picture in your mind. Think of 87 Hogan. Now think of 97 Hogan, and put those images side by side, and think about the mark that they both made. It's incredible. Nobody will ever do that, because I don't think wrestling is ever going to have that, that type of level of boom, fall off, and boom again, because now wrestling's, their claws are dug in deep. But it's such a unique type of thing that you're never going to see something like that come down the pike again. He's that's something that I think needs to be acknowledged as well, is how he could play and understand, most importantly, both of those roles equally well. Knew what his job was as a babyface, knew what his job was as a heel, and went out and did it. Hogan doesn't get a lot of credit for his brain, because he's so fucking goofy with all of his lies. But really, at the end of the day, he knows how to get his own. He knows what to do for himself. You know, he might not have the best advice to give to other talent, but in terms of understanding and knowing what he needs to do, I think Hogan understood what he needs to do better than anybody else has ever understood what they need to do. Like, he really had a firm grasp on that. And he understood the business. He understood opportunities, you know, because the story goes that the NWO might have been Sting had Hogan not gone for it. You know, but Hogan had the sense to say, hey, you know, if I'm going to gamble with my character, you know, I better make sure it's a sure thing. And he knew it would be. Like, I'm not missing that gravy train. I'll hop right on there. And he became a heel and literally printed money. And, you know, you could say that was a risk, but I think deep down Hogan knew it would be a success. I'm not sure how much he was really risking. I think Hogan was smart enough to see that that was going to be a big deal when not everybody might have. You know, that idea, you know, on paper pitched to you in 1996, maybe, you know, but it wasn't. You put those three together in the promo and all the trash thrown in the ring and, you know, Hogan turning on everybody and what a good it's not like he had to transition and like find his footing as a heel. He was that heel on day one. It was like he just turned it on, like it'd been inside of him that whole time. And, you know, a lot of people, when they go through a drastic character change, it takes them a little while to kind of, you know, find their footing, get comfortable, understand what this character is going to be about, what he's going to say, how he's going to do things, that type of thing. And Hogan, from the moment that he walked out there, leg drop Randy Savage, and Mean Gene stuck that microphone in front of his face, he knew exactly what he was doing. Exactly what he was doing. And that's very impressive. It's very impressive. Hogan was a pro in that respect. You know, even coming back to WWE in 2002, I would view as a positive. Even winning the title back, I would view as a positive because I did not like Hogan in 2005 when he came back there. I'm really still to this day very bothered by the SummerSlam 2005 and 2006 matches that he won versus Shawn and Orton. Those to this day bug me, but the 2002 run did not. Because when Hogan came back with the NWO and the fans, many of those fans who probably hated his guts for the last 9 years, once they saw Hogan back in a WWF ring, it was like all of that evaporated away. I got caught up in it too. You know, and next thing, they wanted to cheer him so bad. That match with The Rock at WrestleMania 18 is going to go down, and much like WrestleMania 6, even in the loss, as one of Hogan's greatest moments because of what he did that night. That crowd, in unison, snapped out of everything and remembered all at the same time everything that Hogan was in the WWE. And it all hit him all at once. 70,000 people all coming to the same realization. Holy shit, Hulk Hogan is in a WrestleMania ring for the first time in 9 years. And I feel like I'm 14 again. I feel like I'm 12 again. I feel like I'm 9 again. However old you were at the time, I was 25, you know, but think if you were an 18-year-old in the crowd. Last time you saw Hogan in the WWE, you were 9. You were 8. So that's a big deal to those fans. And that all came out. And as over as The Rock was, they turned on his ass. And they were Team Hogan. So much so that WWE was like, holy shit. Hogan is the most over guy in the business again. And it's 2002. He was coming out to crickets in his last couple appearances in WCW. Here, you know, it's like Hulkamania has been reborn again. It will never die. And what did they do? Slap the red and yellow back on him, and he won the championship the next month at Backlash, beating Triple H. Just a short little nostalgia run. Held it for a month, dropped it to Taker at Judgment Day, and every other match he had, it felt like it was a loss. He lost to The Rock at WrestleMania 18. He then won the title, but then he lost to Undertaker at Judgment Day. He lost to Kurt Angle the next month at King of the Ring, got tapped out. Brock Lesnar beat and bloodied Hulk Hogan and rubbed his blood on his chest shortly after that. Like, Hogan was doing jobs. That 2002 run, I actually liked. It felt good. It gave me closure. It was kind of like Goldberg's 2016 run and 2017 run. That gave me closure, and then Goldberg came back and fucked it all up. Hogan did the same thing. That gave me some closure as a fan. It was nice to see him come back. Win the championship. Saying Hulk Hogan is WWE champion in 2002 was a wild sentence to say. But we said it. You know, and watching Hogan lose, I'm like, okay, it doesn't seem like he's really politicking. That doesn't work for me, brother. No creative control. He's here to do business, show WWE and their locker room that he's not here to say what's what. He's going to do business and, you know, just be one of the boys. And that's the way it was all the way until the end of the Missed America shit. And then he had his falling out and he was gone. And then when he came back, all that creative control crap was back. And Vince McMahon gave it to Hogan and let him call his shots and let him dictate what happens. And that was a really, really, really big turnoff for me. But everything up until that point, 2002, career-wise for Hogan, I would probably view as a positive. The last couple of years of WCW, maybe not so much, because Hogan and his mentality and the mentality of all the old-timers that were there with him, they did nothing to preserve the future of the business. It was all about what they could get at what time. Hogan put over Goldberg in the Georgia Dome. I'll give him credit for that too. Just like the Rock match, just like the Warrior match, he also had that big one with Goldberg. So Hogan would do the job when it was necessary, but he would always find a way back to his championship. And I feel like Hogan could have done more to secure the future, and they only really made one star, Goldberg, and he was an asshole. So I felt like they could have made more. You look over in WWE, they recognize this. While Hogan and Savage and Piper and everybody else was just hogging the spotlight and doing nothing to build up the younger generation of wrestlers to take over when you're gone, that's what WWE was doing. You got Kane and Edge and Christian and The Rock and Mankind and all these crazy wild characters over there that were taking over. And because of Hogan and the mentality of the old timers around him in that company, they played a big role in WCW's death. But I still think everything with Hogan was positive all the way up through the first year or two of the NWO in WCW and his first year or his first few months back in WWE. I look at those as all positives. All positives. And like I said earlier, when you hear him in interviews, he doesn't bitch about current stars. He doesn't have a lot of just rage and resentment, and things like that. Think about Bret Hart. Bret Hart, he's salty as hell, and that's the difference between Bret and Hogan. I think if Hogan was a little bit more lovable, I think some of his lies would be more lovable, because at the end of the day, his lies are victimless, and they would be amusing if Hogan, was maybe a little bit more likable of a person, where Bret Hart, I don't even agree with what he says about Goldberg, but whenever he says it, it comes off amusing, it comes off endearing, and plus Bret's not a racist, which that also helps. But I feel like, there's just we could have loved Hogan's silliness. There could have been an aspect to that could have been amusing and fun. Where some of his lies pissed me off, that's because I didn't really like him. But if I would have liked Hogan, I probably would have been amused by his lies. And, oh my God, listen to what he said this time. But instead, you're like, what the hell is this guy smoking? Good point, Max Pokebro. Thanks for the $2. Hulk Hogan's match with Vince McMahon, also very entertaining match at WrestleMania 19. So even when he was well past physically what he could do in the ring, he was still telling great stories. Him and Vince, that match had no business being good. It wasn't about what they were doing physically. It was about that story, between them and the history and the, years and years of history between them. So when you look at the overall legacy of Hulk Hogan, there's a lot to look at and praise and acknowledge, because I view all of that as positives in Hulk Hogan's life. In terms of the negatives, we talked about the good, we can talk about the bad now. A lot of his politicking, like we've talked about, and a lot of his greed are kind of right there at the forefront. Hogan was always talking about his proper split. He's always got to get his Hulk Hogan dues. He's got to get his money first. And I understand that's just the way everybody is. You can't be faulted for, wanting to be paid appropriately for the work that you do, but I feel like, with Hogan, he's just one of those people, like, it's what's wrong with the world. The rich just want to get richer. The rich are never rich enough. They always need more. They want more for themselves, less for everybody else. And Hogan, I think, was so maybe overly concerned at times with getting his proper split when, maybe sometimes it didn't matter. I just feel like I have a different mentality. If I were to win $4 billion in the lottery, don't get me wrong, I'm keeping a half a billion for myself, but I swear to Jesus, I'm giving away the other $3.5 billion. I don't fucking need it. Give me enough money to buy all my family members' homes and put all the kids in my family through college, and buy myself a home and make sure I'm never going to need anything ever again. And then the rest of the money, give it away. Build a tiny home camp for homeless people, give it to charity, do something fucking good with it. Where, people sitting on a bank account of $5 billion just want to have $6 billion. And it's just so weird. And I think Hogan a lot of times cared a little bit too much about that at times. Plus, the backstage politicking, the sketchiness behind the scenes. Hogan could sometimes talk out of both sides of his mouth. And of course, when he shut down Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura's told the story a million times. He was trying to organize a union in wrestling, which I don't think would have ever happened anyway, but he really, really wanted that to happen. And then after he left WWE and he had wound up suing them for royalties because he was in a ton of WWE home videos and wasn't getting paid for it, he went to court and he won the settlement. But during, the deposition, you're able to ask and find out anything. And he asked, hey, back in the day, who was it that ratted me out to Vince McMahon about the union stuff? Because Vince called Jesse apparently like around WrestleMania 2, yelling at him, how dare you, and almost got fired for it. And Vince found out that Jesse was trying to do that. So Jesse asked during the deposition, and they said it was Hulk Hogan. And he never spoke to Hulk Hogan again after that, because Hulk Hogan could be shady, and he went on the Arsenio Hall show and lied right through his teeth about not doing steroids when it was proven that he already had. And that damaged his reputation a lot as well. When he came back in 1993, I didn't like any of that. I felt like some of that wasn't totally Hogan's fault. It was more Vince, but Hogan came back in 93, came back with that weird black eye at WrestleMania, won the title after the Bret Hart and Yokozuna match, only to drop it to Yoko at King of the Ring and then leave the WWE. It was all a very strange situation. And when you hear about the stories that there was supposed to be a match between Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan, or at least that's the story Bret tells, for the championship, and maybe seemingly Hogan was going to put Bret over and actually do a torch passing, and that didn't happen. That never really sat well with me. Plus, his WCW run, while largely successful, he did have his long runs. He was gobbling up so much guaranteed money, working the easiest schedule than anybody could ever ask for. He's got his own trailer, his own entourage. He can get all of his friends jobs and opportunities. He has creative control. He is never going to do anything in a wrestling angle that doesn't benefit Hulk Hogan. He's not going out there if it doesn't benefit him. If it benefits somebody else as well, then great. But he's not going to go out there in any sort of lose-lose. He's going to make sure that he gets what he wants. And that grows extremely tiresome. This is a team effort here. A lot of people helped make you, and you should have maybe given a little bit more back. Not that he didn't give any back at all, but maybe a little bit more than he should. And that's where all that doesn't work for me, brother, came from. That's where that all originated, because Hogan literally said those words probably many times to promoters, pitching ideas. That doesn't work for me, brother. It doesn't work for me. It might work for the company, the fans, and all of the wrestlers, but if it doesn't work for Hogan, it's not doable. Those are the things that really bug me about him, is that way too many stories like that. If it doesn't benefit me, I'm not interested. Don't ever be that way, please. Don't ever go through life with that mentality. Nobody's going to like you. And of course, Bash at the Beach 2000, that whole debacle centered around Hogan's contract, specifications and Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff and that whole thing. And like I said, the death of WCW, those old guys like him hanging on too long, still out there trying to win championships when the ball should be passed now to the next generation, because you guys aren't going to be around forever. The Pipers and the Savages, they're all starting to fall off. Nash can barely work anymore. Scott Hall is gone. All of these old timers that are just getting old, you took up all those spots and you didn't spend any years building the next generation at all, unlike WWE, who did a tremendous job with that in the Attitude Era. And hanging on too long just hurt WCW, because you weren't drawing any money at that point. Nobody gave a shit about Hulk Hogan by then. They were way over him. Hogan could have disappeared from the scene in 99 and 2000, right, at the end there, and, it would have been fine. WCW probably would have been better off. And of course, we talked about this on Thursday, as well. The lies, and the more lies. Elvis was a Hulkamaniac. He wrestled Brock Lesnar after the UFC and Benjamin Shelton. He got drunk with John Belushi in 86, even though Belushi died in 82. He fought with Pride Fighters in the 1970s, even though it didn't exist. He was supposed to get the George Foreman grill, but he was taking his kids to school and he missed the call. No voicemail, no message on the answering machine, no email, no follow-up call. They just moved right on to the next name, George Foreman. Although F comes before H, so I feel like they would have called George first anyway. He's got so many. Of course, don't forget, he was contacted by Metallica and the Rolling Stones to join their band. He didn't know that Andre the Giant was going to let him win at WrestleMania 3, yada, yada, yada. When you think about and you write down the crazy whopping lies that this guy has told, one thing that they all have in common is that they're victimless. You know, and maybe I'm missing one or two here, but I've never heard Hulk Hogan just go on some rant about how he hates somebody else. He talks about how others hate him. Randy Savage doesn't like me, brother. Ultimate Warrior doesn't like me, brother. Bret Hart doesn't like me, brother. You know, Bret Hart's got a lot of nasty things to say about Hulk, and Hulk might respond with a jab back or something, but you never hear Hulk just ranting and raving. He's not like that. He never was. You know, he didn't sound too good in those released audios and whatnot. But you know, when Hogan is doing interviews, when he's talking, when he's in public, or if he's doing a podcast or whatever he's doing, he doesn't seem resentful, and he shouldn't be. He's got no reason to be resentful. He was given more by pro wrestling than anybody else. He's got no business being a bitter fuck. So the fact that he's not, you know, he shouldn't be. But still, the fact that so many old timers just are bitter. They got complaints. You know, you don't like all the no-selling now. They're just bitter that they're not doing it. They're bitter that they're old and they're not young anymore. So they resent, they lash out. They do very, very typical things that, you know, a very basic college level psychology class will teach you about human nature. And Hogan is not like that. And he always felt like whatever he was saying, his lies were more to embellish himself, you know, never really used to demean someone else. And you got to at least acknowledge that, you know, or say, oh, yeah, he's told some whoppers, but at the end of the day, who did these lies hurt? No one. And if Hogan, like I said earlier, was a little bit more lovable of a human being, then I think his lies would have been more lovable, you know? We would have chuckled at him. You know, we would have done podcasts and say, oh, listen to what our silly friend Hogan is saying today. You know, but he's got that stigma attached to him that, you know, every lie just, you know, adds to his already damaged reputation. And unfortunately, that's on Terry. You know, I had a lot of text messages from friends and family. You know, a lot of people don't even really know that, you know, who Hogan is, you know, in real life. And I was like, thanks for the text message. I'm like, he wasn't really a great person, but it is a big day, you know, and it's a really significant day, and it's a huge loss, you know, for wrestling. So, and one of my buddies texted me about it, and I was like, you know, I really wanted to love him. You know, I think the root of a lot of my criticisms and, you know, and anger was always because I wanted to love him, and he disappointed me. You know, he kind of forced the issue. He made it impossible to love him. I wanted to. I tried. I'm not being a dick. I'm not just disliking him for no reason. I have very good reason. A lot of people do. You know, it's not like I'm just making this shit up, pulling out of my ass. You know, I'm not like that. I'm not going to dislike anybody for no reason. I got way too much to do to be like that. So, you know, I feel like Hogan just kind of forced the issue there. And then in addition to the bad, you know, we have the ugly. I feel like the Hogan Knows Best show really did a lot of damage to his family. Of course, you know, the sex tape and the racist rant, you know, that he was caught on tape saying, you know, I understand people who say, hey, Greg, would you want to be judged by the worst thing you ever said behind closed doors? No, of course not. But I'm also not a celebrity. And it's an unfair game. And if you are in someone like Hogan's position, it sucks that your privacy was invaded, but you have to be extra careful, or you have to understand that you are at a disadvantage. Celebrities are at a disadvantage. If they are ever caught doing or saying something that does not make them look good without their knowledge and it gets leaked, it doesn't matter if it gets leaked. It doesn't matter if their privacy is violated. All that matters is what they said. That's what the public's going to care about. You know, and the way Hogan was ranting and raving, talking about, you know, the racist words and verbiage he was using, and the craziest one saying that, you know, he could be, his family could be reincarnated as a black family for karma, you know, is just like, what the, who says this shit? But he didn't know he was being recorded, but he still said it. Sorry, that's just the breaks, man. You know, everybody's, oh, he was without his knowledge. It doesn't matter. You can't say that shit because because if you are recorded, it's going to do damage. It does not matter. And he took, you know, he won that big lawsuit. That Gawker lawsuit was really ugly. And that revealed a whole bunch of nasty details. But that was back in 2002, and Hogan sued them for like damages and upwards of like $100 million because, you know, he slept with Bubba the Love Sponge's wife, Heather Clem, and it was recorded, and then Gawker released the footage, and Hogan wound up suing and winning. You know, and they argued, you know, his lawyers argued that Gawker, you know, grossly violated his privacy, and the publication of the video had no journalistic value whatsoever. And I think their argument that it was First Amendment didn't really resonate with a Florida jury who wound up siding with Hogan and awarded him $115 million in damages in an additional $25 million in punitive damages. And then Gawker wound up filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy and settled with Hogan for around $30 million. But that whole thing, you know, that was just very, very ugly and embarrassing, and it was out in the public. And, you know, yeah, Hogan didn't mean for any of that to happen, but guess what? It happened. And it's all about how you deal with it now. And now you're still appearing in wrestling, and you've got a locker room full of wrestlers, many of which are black. And you now have to go in front of these people after being outed with some of these things you said. And I think because Hogan, it was without his knowledge, because his privacy was violated, if he would have structured that apology better, I'm not sure all would have been forgiven that day, but it would have put him on the road to redemption. Perhaps. You know, if he would have just been a little bit more genuine and a little bit more honest, and instead of playing himself as the victim, because with Hogan, everything is about him. Everything is about him. It's never about anybody else. And that's one of the ugly things about him. And this is a perfect example of that. Because for as smart as Hogan is, and I've given him credit for being smart earlier, he's also pretty fucking stupid. Because I feel like he just needed to read the room there. And just know what he said was wrong. Even if you don't believe it in your heart, you gotta say something better than, now be careful, brothers and sisters. If you're ever gonna do something, make sure the cameras aren't on, brother. That's not an apology. And the New Day, you know, Xavier and Kofi and Big E and, you know, a lot of the other black wrestlers in the locker room did not respond well to that, and they didn't accept his apology. Like, fuck that guy. The nerve of him to come in here and say these things to us. My God, how fucking tone deaf can you be? And clueless can you be? And I feel like if he just would have done better, if he would have had an apology where afterwards we would have heard the opposite story. Hulk Hogan's apology was apparently really, really well received by the locker room. Many of the wrestlers even approached him after and shook his hand and said they appreciated his apology. If we would have gotten the exact opposite of that, you know, I think that could have maybe helped a little bit of Hogan's reputation to where maybe when he came out in LA a few months ago, he wouldn't have been booed out of the building, you know? So a lot of that is on him, and a lot of that is his own doing. But when you know, take a big look at the good and the bad and the ugly, the good outweighs it all. It does. And there's a lot of bad and there's a lot of ugly, you know. I don't know if there's like levels to racism or not. You know, Hogan said some very, very racist things behind closed doors, but I don't see a Klan hood on him going to fucking rallies, although Trump rallies are close enough. Most Trump supporters are racist. They're either outwardly racist or they don't think they're racist, and they are. I got some family members that are that way. They don't think they're racist, but they are racist as fuck. And they just don't. They're clueless. They have no idea. They're no idea. And so, you know, Hogan, I wish his apology would have been better, because I would have liked to see how people reacted. And I could have judged it better as well, you know, if he would have done better there and maybe thought it through. And I'm like, okay, he's never going to live that down. You know, he's never going to live that down. People are going to remember he said that forever. But it just made it worse. It amplified it with his shitty apology. Where with a good one, you know, some people might have chosen never to forgive. You know, that's their prerogative. But I think some would have. And that was a big deal. But at the end of the day, pro wrestling lost the biggest star it's ever seen. Hulk Hogan passing away at age 71 is still kind of a surreal thing to wrap our heads around, especially me, you know, who watched Hulk Hogan win the WWE title when I was 7. So for the first time. So my entire life, I've, Hogan has been a part of it. I had a birthday cake, Hulk Hogan birthday cake for my 10th birthday. A little drawing of him. I had his LJN figure. Hogan was a big deal. I've told the story before, even when he lost the title to Andre on NBC in front of 33 million people. I watched that with my family that night in the living room. We had one of those little TVs that sat on the floor that was like in the box. You could put your Nintendo and cable box on top of it, one of those, and watched it. And, I was a pretty distraught kid. And I remember when I went up to bed, my mom came up and checked on me, made sure I was doing okay. And I immediately booked a rematch that night in my bedroom with my LJN figures, and Hogan squashed Andre and won the belt back. I wouldn't have been able to sleep without doing that match first. Sat down on the floor, got my ring out, Hogan versus Andre. Hogan beat the fuck out of him and won his belt back. And I went to bed and woke up the next day. Luckily, I was happy it was a weekend, but woke up the next day still kind of reeling from that. And so, those are the things when you have those type of memories and that level of nostalgia. It's different, I think, for fans my age. We're processing this loss different than the millennials, or maybe not the millennials. What's the Gen Z or whatever? I'm Gen X, but Gen Z is not going to have the same type of mindset about Hulk that someone my age is, because they didn't live it. And that's one of the primary themes I've said over and over when it comes to, wrestling and wrestling opinions. If you didn't live it, you don't know. You just don't. I'm sorry. And that goes for any era or whatever. You can't pretend to know anything about it if you weren't there. And a lot of that stuff I was there for, and a lot of it I was live in person for. So I not only saw it, but I breathed it and lived it. And so when it comes to stuff like that, that's why a lot of those, wrestling deaths can really hit me, especially Attitude Era stars dying, because I've got a story about them. When I saw them wrestle or ran into them at a Waffle House or this or that, and that's, I think it just hits everyone differently. And hopefully you guys were okay with how I chose to process and acknowledge his death. And hopefully I didn't disappoint any of you. And, thanks for listening to all of that. Rest in peace, Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea, dead at age 71. And it's going to take a little time for that to fully soak in. It's Saturday. He died on Thursday. And it's still kind of dominating my thoughts. It's hard not to when you're going on 42 years of watching wrestling, which is what I'm currently at. I'm in my 6th decade of life and over 40 years of watching wrestling. So yeah, my brain just needs some time, to organize all this. So hopefully I was able to give you guys a proper tribute there to the life and career of Hulk Hogan. Since we don't have much time left in the podcast, we got close to an hour, but we got to get into some of the other things. It should be noted here, big news after Hulk Hogan's death, it was revealed that WWE has canceled the late night roast thing with Tony Hinchcliffe on SummerSlam weekend. Good. That was a smart move. It's too early. It's too soon. And those type of roasts that are so purposely, kind of edgy, they're like the Comedy Central roast where like nothing is off limits. I wouldn't have wanted to hear Hogan death jokes on there, and we would have gotten a fuck ton of them. So that's good. Moving on, some news tidbits here. Jay White, we got an update on him. Sounds like he might be out longer than expected. Fightful Select had a report or an update on him yesterday. And they said that those, and I quote, those we've spoken to claim that Jay White had also been dealing with a shoulder injury. Sources in the company have said that White had been weighing whether or not to get the shoulder surgery, though we haven't heard if that decision was made. If so, it's possible he'd miss the rest of the year. So if he's going to get an additional surgery, Jay White is going to be out a little bit longer. Also, update on Karrion Kross and Scarlett. If Karrion Kross is to be believed, his WWE contract still has not been signed. This is according to Fightful Select. They spoke to numerous talent who have claimed they've asked Kross about the nature of him and Scarlett's deals, and those that they've spoken to say Kross claims to them that no new deal has been signed and that his deal is still up in August as of now. When? August 1st? You got a match at SummerSlam, son. So I feel like they're probably sticking around, but still no official word on their contract. Also, this past Saturday on Collision, we had an injury to Colton Gunn, and he was scheduled to be involved in that Eliminator tournament that AEW is doing right now, the Tag Team number one contender Eliminator tournament that I think FTR is going to win and go to Forbidden Door and win the titles from Hurt Syndicate. But he was supposed to be involved in that, got injured on Collision, and he's going to be out for a while. That sucks because the Guns just got back. Also, this past week in NXT, I don't know why, but Undertaker showed up there and chokeslammed Trick Williams. They're doing some crossover angle with LFG. Trick made some comments towards Taker on Monday Night Raw during a commercial break, and then Taker showed up on NXT and chokeslammed Tricky William. I don't know what that accomplishes. I don't need to see Undertaker in the ring chokeslamming anybody, especially not wearing a fucking swim cap or whatever that thing was. I don't watch LFG either. I don't like those concept shows, and I'm just not going to have anything to do with it. So I just wanted to mention that if anybody was complaining about Taker chokeslamming Trick Williams, I agree. I don't think it was necessary. It's one thing to bring out a legend for nostalgia. It's another thing to just chokeslam your champion. Have a fucking 62-year-old chokeslam your champion. Whatever. Undertaker, please stay out of our lives. Here's something fun. Last night, AAA ran, I guess, their Alianzas show, and Dominic Mysterio showed up. There was a match between El Grande Americano and Octagon Jr., which El Grande won, and then Vikingo came to the ring to issue an open challenge for Triple Mania, and it was initially accepted by Dragon Lee, but then El Grande Americano also interrupted, and then as Lee and Americano were brawling, Dominic Mysterio showed up under a hood, attacked Vikingo, took off the hood, grabbed the Mega Championship, and he vowed to win the title. And I think what we're going to get is a four-way at Triple Mania. Dominic, Grande, Dragon Lee, and Vikingo at Triple Mania in a four-way. That's pretty awesome. Also, El Messias defeated Alberto El Patron, I should say. And now, per the stipulation, Del Rio is forced to leave AAA. So is that because WWE needs him out of there? Because they can't have him employed? And so he's gone? He's going to go to CMLL or something? Or are they bringing him in? I hope they're not. I don't think they are. I'm hoping this just means Alberto Del Fuckface is just gone because he keeps surfacing in random places here and there, and hopefully he just stays gone. Especially if WWE wants to bring back Paige. It's the last thing y'all need right now. I wish I had some opinions to give you on the G1 Climax, but I'm skipping it this year. I've not watched any of it. I believe last night they are up to night 5. Got a quick look at the standings, but I have not watched a single match this year, and I don't think I'm gonna. So I'm sorry that this year I'm just kind of skipping the G1. I got too much going on. I'm busy. So no G1 for Greg this year. Let's circle back, talk a little bit about this. Actually, no. Let's talk about Dynamite real quick. Not going to spend a lot of time on it, and then we'll finish with Smackdown and the SummerSlam cards, which we now have set Saturday and Sunday. We know which matches are going to be on which night, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about Dynamite, which was back in the ballroom there in Chicago as they are continuing their residency there. And Hangman shows up to the building, and he's immediately interviewed by Renee Paquette. And then I loved this little piece of business here. MJF showed up and got in Hangman's face and, starts saying, he wants a title shot or whatever. And Hangman says, you're not going to goad me into a title shot. You can either use your contract for a shot or you can go out there and earn it the old-fashioned way. And I know you're too chicken shit to do it either way, so just get the fuck out of my face, and walked away. It was such a brush. I loved that. Just the way he was like, dude, I got no time for your short ass. You're a pussy. You know it. I'm not giving you any of my time. I loved that. So good. So he goes right to the ring, Hangman does, to have a match with Wheeler Yuta. Beats the piss out of Wheeler Yuta, bloodies him up, beats him, and then wraps the chain around Yuta's neck and is going to hang him over the top rope. But before he does, he just tells Yuta, no one's coming to save you. You're the part of a faction. Where are they? No one is coming to save you. And then he lets him go. And Yuta just trembles, covered in blood. That was good stuff. That was really good stuff. Like I said, they got that tag team eliminator thing going on. FTR defeated Jet Speed to advance. I feel like they're going to win this and go on to Forbidden Door to beat Hurt Syndicate. And of course, I've got on my brain, as I've said in the last couple of podcasts, I've got Edge and Christian teaming up kind of in my head for All Out in Toronto. Seems like it would be perfect. And since we would also see some issues with MJF and Hurt Syndicate later, I think we can see how all this is going to shake out. But after the match, Tony Schiavone comes into the ring to interview FTR, and they start talking their shit about Adam Copeland, and Copeland comes out to the stage. And after he speared Stokely Hathaway last week, apparently they got like a restraining order or something on Edge, or he can't touch them, or he can't physically touch them per some stip or whatever. So Cope says, hey, since I can't touch you, I went out and found someone that can. And I hired, what do you say? I hired some backup, or I hired somebody to basically kick your ass, and kind of forgot what decade he was in or what century he was in. And somehow he found himself back in the Attitude Era, knocking on the APA's door and buying their services. It's the Hurt Syndicate. He hired the Hurt Syndicate to come out and beat up FTR. Now, some folks found that baffling, and it was a little bit, but at least Hurt Syndicate has some history already with FTR. You can see that issue beginning to grow. So I was okay with it. I wasn't scratching my head maybe as much as others were, but I do understand that it did feel a little bit weird when they came out on his behalf. So Hurt Syndicate beat down FTR. And then Copeland winds up getting in the ring. He goes to spear Stokely, but he spears a security guard instead. And that whole thing is now setting up what I think is going to be an issue between FTR and Hurt Syndicate. And we kind of pitched the scenario of MJF costing the Hurt Syndicate the tag team titles weeks ago. And now it feels like that's happening again. Because later on, MJF would be mad. Was he mad about... what the hell was he mad about? Oh, he was mad about Edge. Because later on, he would be backstage with them, and he would be like, yo, what are you doing? You weren't anywhere around when I needed you. Now you're friends with Cope now. All the time it took me to get into this faction, and now you're just doing business with him outright when you should be concentrating on getting me my world championship back. And that's when Lashley jacks him up against a locker, and he was like, we're not your lackeys. We're not here to do shit for you. So you can feel like there's some, I kind of thought it was going to be an accidental, type of thing. But now with Hurt Syndicate now again on the outs with Max and Lashley really not liking him, I feel like maybe between now and Forbidden Door, they completely kick him out of the group, and then he shows up and he helps FTR win the tag team championships at Forbidden Door, and that sets FTR on a course with Cope and Christian for All Out. So I feel like that's how that's going to go now with everything that we saw here with the Hurt Syndicate and FTR. But right now, FTR, they're the only names in the bracket. They've already advanced, and I don't know who else is in this thing. I think we're supposed to have a match tonight on Collision, which goes live in, I believe, in an hour. I didn't write down the Collision card tonight. Whoopsie. You guys are just going to have to rely on social media to tell you what matches are on Collision tonight, because I don't even know. Also on Dynamite, we had an update on Will Ospreay. Of course, there was like an injury angle ran for him on All In where they Pillmaned his head in the chair. And he's interviewed, I think, by Schiavone in the ring, and it sounds bad. He's saying that he's got some herniated discs that are clashing with his spinal cord. And, kind of his demeanor, it sounds like he's saying goodbye to us. But then he kind of switches gears and he goes, the good news is the doctor says it's treatable. It's treatable. So he hopes, even though he's got bulging discs into his spinal cord, he claims if all goes well, he can be back for Forbidden Door, which is in a month. That's amazing. I kind of feel like he shouldn't work Forbidden Door, because if he's back by Forbidden Door, it's a difference between being back and then being able to be on TV to build your match. If he's going to be back by Forbidden Door, what kind of match are they going to give him? He's just going to work just a New Japan guy. I guess it's just going to be a, kind of like a cold match. You versus you. Not much time to really build this. But with Ospreay, I'm cool with him missing Forbidden Door. It would suck if he wasn't there, but I'd rather have him healthy for the long term than healthy for the short term. So if he needs more time, dude, take as much time as you need. And all the best to Will Ospreay, because he is one of my favorites in the business, and I believe he's going to be world champion one day. But that is only if he can stay healthy, and given the style that he works, he's going to be one of those wrestlers that's going to have nagging injuries until the end of time. So all the best to Will Ospreay there, and if he can really get back in that short amount of time, that would be incredible. Also on Wednesday, we had Toni Storm. She defeated Billie Starkz. There was a post-match beatdown. Athena came down from the balcony to kind of tease a cash-in, but it didn't happen. And Alex Windsor wound up coming out and making the save for Toni Storm. Also, Swerve and Hechicero battled to a no contest when Lance Archer interfered. We had Bandito and Brody King coming out to run them off. And then after they leave, Okada is in to nail Swerve with a chair from behind. But Swerve is able to run off Okada before he can do any more damage. I think he intended to put the chair on Swerve's face and put him out of action as well before he stopped it. And like I said last week, I really like this Swerve and Okada program. This is going to be fun. I feel like they're probably going to do it at Forbidden Door, but if you could somehow save it for All Out, maybe that would be better. But Swerve winning that championship from Okada, I could definitely see that happening, and I think it will. We had another promo battle between MJF and Mark Briscoe as well. They culminated with MJF kind of laughing and running off. And, of course, the main event was Claudio versus Mark Briscoe. Briscoe picked up the win here. I feel like Briscoe could be a big star if they wanted him to be. He got a roll-up win over Claudio, which surprised him. And after the match, Mox runs out there. He winds up getting on the mic. He calls out Hangman Page. Hangman comes out and basically issues the challenge to Moxley for next week. If you want to do this, we're going to do it on my terms. You and me next week, Dynamite for the champion. And everyone but a referee is banned from ringside. Unless you're a referee, you are banned. So I'm wondering if they're going to secretly... Because when you stick something like that in a sentence, that makes me think they're planting the seed for something. So I don't know if Moxley is going to secretly go get Wheeler Yuta licensed as a referee, and then when there's a ref bump, he runs out there and tries to help or something. Like, I don't know what they're going to do here. The Texas Death Match was just a couple of weeks ago. Usually Texas Death Matches are blow-offs, and now they're going to go and have another match. And it's going to be a standard match, but people are going to be barred from ringside. So I'm really hoping this is like the final blow-off and that Hangman just beats Moxley, because I don't really want this issue to continue. But if they got to do one more match, fine. I'm not really sure why it's necessary. But a big title match on Dynamite, I like that. I like title matches on Dynamite. They'll probably pop a bigger number for that. And hopefully Hangman will just beat him, and that will be that. And Moxley will not retain. I'm like, maybe it's possible that Hangman won that championship just to give the fans the moment so they wouldn't complain. Now they're going to have Moxley win the belt back so he can drop it to Darby. I don't think so. I don't think that's happening. I think Hangman will find his way to retain next week and hopefully just beat Mox clean and be done with it. We will see. It was funny, though, when he made that stipulation, and then Moxley did not say yes or no. He didn't even agree to it. Hangman just starts walking up the ramp, and when he's walking up the ramp, the graphic is already there, complete with match stipulation, which is something they do a lot. It's just kind of silly. Like, they know that looks silly, right? It just doesn't look... just looks dumb, but whatever. I just thought it was funny how that graphic was already up there, and they had it all set and ready to go. Dynamite wasn't bad this week. I thought it was an okay show, and next week it will be interesting to watch that championship match. Now let's talk about last night's SmackDown. Like I said, outside of the Hulk Hogan tribute and what I thought was a really good promo but a really good Cody Rhodes promo on John Cena for SummerSlam, kind of a nothing show, sort of. Had a couple of returns as well. But after we had the big Hogan tribute, we opened up with a big Impulsive TV segment, which was just another final segment, or one of the final segments before the tag team match at SummerSlam. It resulted in a brawl with all four guys, and Orton and Jelly won this particular scuffle. We'll be doing predictions, I guess, next week, probably, I guess, Thursday. Thursday. We're probably going to have to do SummerSlam predictions. We'll be here Thursday. I'll post a link to that in the next couple of days, so just keep that in mind. So I'm not sure who I'm going to predict quite yet, but I feel like it might be Drew and Logan getting the win at SummerSlam. Roxanne Perez defeated Alexa Bliss last night one-on-one. Of course, Alexa and Charlotte are getting the tag team title match at SummerSlam. Alexa hit a Twisted Bliss off the top onto the floor onto Roxanne, but she didn't land it very good, and she came down face first on the knee of Roxanne, and her nose got all busted. So hopefully Alexa Bliss did not break her nose, but it was definitely bleeding, and she busted herself up. She got back in the ring. Or I'm sorry, she executed the Twisted Bliss to Raquel on the outside of the ring, not Roxanne. Raquel's out there interfering, so she hit her with the Twisted Bliss, but came down right on her knee, busted her nose up, then got back in the ring where Roxanne was waiting to roll her up for the win. So little victory there for Roxanne, and hopefully Alexa Bliss's cute little nose is okay. Also, we had Jade Cargill defeating Chelsea Green. Chelsea was backstage talking shit, I guess, about Jade. Jade standing behind her, listening to everything, punches her in the face. They brawl, and Jade literally drags Chelsea to the ring, where they then have a match, and Jade Cargill hits Chelsea with the Jaded for the win. After the match, the Secret Hervis attacks Jade, but she is saved by her SummerSlam opponent, Women's World Champion Tiffany Stratton. So that was kind of interesting there, that she came down and ran them off. Then we had the Cody Rhodes promo. He offered a tribute to Hulk Hogan. I have no problem with that. Cody is the face of the company. WWE is going to tribute Hulk Hogan. I know we spent the first hour plus talking about Hogan, but one thing I will say and reiterate that, it's a losing battle, and it's a waste of time, and it's not productive to police how everybody reacts. Like I said, I don't think anybody should be disrespectful. I don't like seeing, people pissing and shitting on graves and celebrating deaths and whatnot. I think that there's a line that needs to be drawn there, but in terms of Cody tributing him, give him a break. Shut up. There's no reason to criticize him, for this. WWE is going to tribute Hulk Hogan. He passed away. He's going to probably be a sizable part of Monday Night Raw as well. And so don't worry about it. Like I said, Hulk Hogan's death is going to produce and has produced probably the widest array of reactions humanly possible because of the flawed and complicated dude that he was. Live your life in such a way that when you die, people don't say he was a complicated guy or girl. Live in a way to where people aren't talking about you like that, but I feel like I saw a lot of people, oh, Cody said that about, like, just stop. Just think about, is any of that necessary? I'm a big, big, big believer. It's one of my Greg commandments in pick your battles. Not everything needs to be a battle. You don't have to fight everything. You don't have to reject and resent and get angry about everything. There are some battles you just choose to not fight, and if you don't like what somebody said, like I said, if you're being hateful or something, I'd be critical too if somebody was, posting a picture of them defecating on the grave of Hulk Hogan. I think that's really, really shitty, but in terms of people having different emotions and reactions to his death, we're all different people, man. There's billions of people on this planet. We're all going to think and act different ways. And for any of us to go around and tell the others how they should act is just stupid. Everybody has the right to kind of process this. All I ask is just stay away from the evil and, don't make yourself look worse than the person that you are criticizing, because that's happened a lot too. But in terms of how people want to react or how the black community wants to react, it's not your job to tell them what to say or what to do or how to feel. Fuck you. It's everybody's individual job to process that. And to get mad at a Cody Rhodes tribute because he's the face of the company and he's talking about the face of the company from yesterday because he died, come on, pick your battles. That's not a battle you need to fight. You don't need to worry about it. There's no tweet necessary that you need to make. It's not necessary. Don't worry about it. His tribute to Hogan was fine. He also talked about John Cena. And he talked about how he wants to fight the real John Cena. He wants the real guy. The best possible John Cena. Got a damn good promo, too. I kind of thought it was going to be a nothing promo. He had his one lone July appearance last week. We will see him next week. because it's August next week. Night before SummerSlam, him and Cody will have one more showdown before the big event. And this little promo here by Cody, it's not the first time that Cody's had to, kind of build a match by himself since he's been in the company, and he did really well here. The Miz showed back up. Jacob Fatu is backstage cutting a promo on Solo Sikoa. Miz shows up and says that he got them a match right away. I'm not going to forget what you did to me. You put me out of action, so I went and talked to Aldis. I got us a match right now. And so they went to the ring, and Miz got his ass kicked, got beat by Jacob Fatu. There's a post-match beatdown here by the MFTs. Jimmy Uso tries to come out and help, but to no avail. And the MFTs destroy Jacob Fatu. We had another return. Kiana James is back. So Zelina Vega goes to confront Julia, and then backstage, and then Kiana James returns out of nowhere, out of the blue, and says that she's now Julia's manager, and that if Zelina wants to talk to her, she's going to have to go through proper channels. So it's that again. So we've had this happen a few times throughout the years in wrestling. So Zelina is just like, well, I'm already standing here, so I would like, fuck your channels. I would like a rematch, and Julia seemed incredibly uninterested in granting her that. I have a feeling we might get that next week on SmackDown, since it doesn't look like that is going to make SummerSlam. Maybe they make SmackDown. And in the main event, it was supposed to be the tag title match, Rey Fenix and Andrade taking on the Wyatts. They would win this match via disqualification when Nikki Cross, Sister Abigail, pulls out the referee during a 3 count, calls for the bell, and then the entire tag team division comes out there. Phoenix and Andrade, Motor City Machine Guns, DIY, and the Profits. They're all out there brawling like crazy. You knew what this was leading up to. Nick Aldis coming out and saying, what we're going to do is a big TLC match at SummerSlam. So here I wanted so badly for Becky Lynch and Lyra Valkyria to have a ladder match to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Rey and Eddie and the 30th anniversary of Shawn and Razor, and instead we get a TLC match commemorating the 25th anniversary of the one they did at SummerSlam 2000, a match that I got to see live. I was there in person for that one, and so I'm okay with this. I feel better now that I had the right idea. I was adamant. I'm like, man, it's SummerSlam, Intercontinental Championship, do a ladder match. Now I understand why they didn't. On Monday Night Raw, I thought Becky's proposal to Lyra was going to be a ladder match, and instead it was like a no DQ match or something. I'm like, oh, man, Cena and Cody are already doing that. Well, I guess now we know why we're not getting a ladder match is because we're getting a TLC match. So this should be pretty good. We'll see if these 4 teams can live up to what Dudley's, Hardy's, and Edge and Christian did back in the year 2000. So TLC match it is. We also have our cards set for SummerSlam now. I think one of these might be missing a match, because it's 5 matches and I think 6 matches, right? So here's what WWE has released for SummerSlam Saturday. We've got the Women's Tag Team Championship, Raquel and Roxanne, R&R, defending their championships against Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair. Also, Gunther defending his championship against CM Punk. Randy Orton and Jelly Roll versus Drew McIntyre and Logan Paul. Roman Reigns and Jey Uso versus Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed. Tiffany Stratton versus Jade Cargill. And Sami Zayn versus Karrion Kross. So this is 6 matches on Saturday. Looks pretty solid. Zayn and Kross, I'm surprised they're doing this. To be honest, their Monday Night Raw match was not good. So that is pretty weak, but you got the big Roman and Reed and Breaker match on here, and of course Punk and Gunther. Saturday does not look too bad. Here's what we have for Sunday. Sunday is going to be Dominic Mysterio defending the Intercontinental Championship against AJ Styles. All championship matches on the show, by the way, or on this night. John Cena, of course, in the main event, will be defending against Cody Rhodes. We have Solo Sikoa versus Jacob Fatu in a cage match. Also, Becky Lynch and Lyra Valkyria for the Intercontinental Championship. That will be a no DQ, no countout ordeal. And we have the women's title on the line, triple threat, Naomi defending against Io Sky and Rhea Ripley. So it feels like the TLC match will probably be here, right? On Sunday, that would give both shows 6 matches, or both nights 6 matches, I should say. I feel like we should go one better, though, and add one more other than that to each night and do 7 on each night. So you could put Zelina and Julia on one of them, and you could do maybe Damian Priest and Aleister Black. Sounds like they're getting left off, unless they throw that on the card last minute. But that's a big disappointment that Damian Priest and Aleister Black doesn't appear to be on SummerSlam as of right now, when it has felt like they've been building towards that. But it's a 2-night event. You can't give us 7 matches in a 2-night event. Why is that too much? Why is 14 matches spread out over 2 nights too much for WWE? Come on. Give us those 2. Please, WWE. But that's how our SummerSlam card is looking right now. All right. And that is kind of the end of our notes and whatnot here. I'll go over to the chat now and see what you guys have to say. And we'll spend a few minutes answering some questions and whatnot. And then I got to get out of here. By the way, tomorrow, we are watching SummerSlam 1995. You know, I should have maybe, I don't know if there's time now. Probably not. But we are going to be watching SummerSlam 1995 tomorrow. 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Maybe I should pick another show that's Hulk Hogan related, perhaps. Hogan is not even on this event. Maybe there's something that we can throw together last minute, but, you know, we've talked a lot about Hogan over the last few days. Maybe tomorrow will be a nice break, actually. So we'll probably stick with SummerSlam 1995, but maybe we can still do something Hulk Hogan watch-along related here in the next few days. But that is on tap for tomorrow. SummerSlam 1995 watch-along commemorating the 30th anniversary. And then, hey, in August, even after SummerSlam is over next weekend, we could still do another watch-along or 2 of classic SummerSlams, even though we've done a lot of them. We still got to do 96 and 97. We haven't done 95, 96, or 97, so maybe we can get to those this month. We will see. I won't rule it out. Let me go back to the top here. Oh, cool. Nice, Chris. Yeah. Come to Survivor Series with us. Sweet. Oh, yeah, we'll get some more people together. Spartan Sprinkles, you got 5 more. He didn't kill or rape, but him being a racist union buster was enough for me to not give a shit about any other part of his legacy, and you have every right to feel that way. I feel like the celebratory nature of some of the tweets and responses were, I don't know, just doesn't make you feel good. You know, even if the person's a shitty person, there's just something about that I just find disrespectful. But if some of those mistakes that Hogan made in his life were too much for you, then that's absolutely your right to feel that way. 5 more from Spartan. The world is a better place. Well, Hogan, but I won't celebrate his passing, if that makes sense. Flair is 100 times worse. Flair is objectively worse. He is. Flair is someone who has victims, where, Hogan doesn't have too many victims. He might have backstage political red tape victims, of maybe a couple of throats he stepped on creative control-wise, but Ric Flair is a sexual predator, and he's sexually assaulted women before, which Hogan has never done. And Flair's like a worse person, he really is. He's just worse. There's so much about, think about Ric Flair, when he does interviews. He would get mad about Becky Lynch's use of the man. He's always got something nasty to say. He's the opposite of Hogan in that regard. Hogan, never came across bitter, where Flair, every 2 damn days, he's just mad about something. The fucking tweets that he posts with the first letter of each word capitalized. He's such a goddamn weirdo. And he's always so bitter about everything, considering all the success that he had. He's always just got something to complain about, or whatever. He's just different. Where Hogan is, self-centered in the same regard, but and in much the same way Flair is, but, when Hogan is speaking, he doesn't come across angry and bitter and resentful, of the business, and even Flair, when he talks about other people, Flair's got strong opinions about a lot of people, a lot of it negative. Hogan, he doesn't, even when people talk shit about him, he doesn't clap back very hard. He's just I don't give a shit, or Brett's Brett, or whatever. He might have something else to say, but he never tries to it doesn't turn into a Kendrick and Drake war. He just kind of brushes it off, or he doesn't care. And that's a big difference where if somebody says something bad about Ric Flair, he fucking posts, like a fucking Donald Trump style tweet, where he's all fucking butthurt. I'm like, don't worry about it, dude. Jesus Christ. Don't you have anything better to do than sit here and worry about a fucking South Park episode? Jesus Christ. Damn weirdo. Yeah, Jimmy Hart, that was rough to see him. He was going through it. Jimmy was going through it. You feel for Jimmy because Jimmy Hart's a legend. And when it comes to people you don't ever hear anything bad about, what has Jimmy Hart ever done that's been negative? Nothing. He's just the sweetest, most harmless little man. I remember on Legends House years ago when the WWE Network first started. And when he was in there and I'm like, he is weird. He's just weird. He eats like beans and potato and he's just a weirdo. And I'm like, I kind of like that he's weird. That's probably why he's lived so long. He lives a weird life and he's a weird person, but he's a cool person and he's a legend. And watching him so emotional, I was like, oh man, you just wanted to give Jimmy a hug. Just so I could walk right up to him. Just like Roy Kent stomping up to Jamie Tart after he punches his dad and just hugs him. I love you, Jimmy. It's going to be all right. You just wanted to hug him. You just wanted to hug him. Poor Jimmy Hart. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. You're telling me there, Sonny. We Are Pro Wrestling in hindsight. Hogan's last match should have been the Vince match at WrestleMania 19. Yeah. I still think it's wild that I was able to watch a Hulk Hogan versus Roddy Piper match just a couple months after that at Judgment Day when he was Mr. America and he faced Roddy Piper. I remember finding that to be so surreal. I'm like, God, 20 years after these guys were, or nearly, mixing it up in the 80s there and the wars they had and then the WCW history they had. And, I never got to see the two of them wrestle each other ever. And the fact that I got to see that in 2003 of all years was pretty wild. Killer Cam, hey Greg, was wondering if you've seen the top 25 SummerSlam matches on WWE's YouTube channel. Number 5 is Brett and Owen. I did not. You know what I did watch today, though? I watched the watch-along. Kurt Angle and Rey Mysterio sat down and watched their SummerSlam match together. They're so adorable together. Kurt Angle is just so cute as an old guy, and they're talking about all the chemistry they had, and Rey was like, yeah, he goes, I was under the ring. He goes, I came out in like a jumpsuit so nobody would see me, and I got under the ring, and then when I was under there, they're like talking to me, like it's almost time to go, and he goes, I can't find my mask, and I'm feeling around for it. And he goes, I had to use the monitor that was under there. I had to use it as a flashlight. And he goes, finally, I found my mask, and I put it on at the last minute. And then I came in and did my entrance. And if you watch the first couple of minutes of that match, he's messing with his mask a lot. He's fixing it and stuff. So when he was under there, he couldn't find it, and it was almost his turn to come out. That was a pretty funny story. Terry Allen Jr., appreciate the 10, was at one FW Summer Stage wrestling show yesterday. Saw MJF, Dasha Gonzalez ring announce some AEW stars. I was sitting at Section A close to the ring, and Tony Schiavone walked past us, and I was shocked. That is awesome. Tony would have stopped and gotten a pic. Yeah, I saw Tony on the Jericho Cruise. He's awesome. He is awesome. You should have snapped a pic with the great Schiavone. I'm so glad you had a good experience there. I have never been... Ever. I've never been to an indie show. Never been. We got a local group here in San Diego. And I've always been meaning to check them out. Just show up there. Maybe film some content or something. I never have. Contact the promoters and something. See if they want to do anything. I just never been to an indie show for anything. I'd like to go. I want to go to one of them shows where there's 9 people there and I'm one of them. I want to go to that. This is awesome. We got a one-man, this is awesome chant going on. Still scrolling through these chats here. It's not hot. Good point, Zane G. That has got to be my favorite Hogan comedic moment. He didn't have many comedic moments at all, but that was one of them. Was he maybe backstage? Well, he wasn't even a part of that. What was the one that Kane did? When Kane was imitating Hulk Hogan, he had the Canaanites and the Rock was Canaanites. Was Hogan back there for that? But that wasn't really Hogan. That was Kane. But Hogan's funniest moment was when he was going in the Dungeon of Doom cave or whatever. And it's not hot. And I'm like, why would it be hot? Y'all going outside? Touch any hot waterfalls? Tell me where they are. Under a geothermal hotspot, I guess, because I don't know where these things exist. But the fact that that startled Hogan, the fact that it wasn't hot, it's chilly, ooh. I could watch that all day. Okay, thank you for that, Ryan. Thank you for clarifying. I wasn't aware of that. Priest and Black and Julia Zelina are both on SmackDown next week. That sucks. They should both be on SummerSlam. Thank you for clarifying that, Ryan. You know, I think the next two big ones, you know, Hogan, you know, obviously was the biggest, but the next two are going to be Ric Flair and Vince McMahon. Those are going to be very, very similar episodes. Maybe not so much with Vince, you know, because Vince and Flair, I believe, are far worse. I'm probably going to be a lot harder on them, you know, than I am Hogan. I wish he wouldn't have said the things he said. I wish he wouldn't have been the way he was a few times here and there. But ultimately, I can never classify Hulk Hogan as a monster. I can just classify him as kind of an unlikable person who made a lot of mistakes. Flair and Vince, however, they are monsters. And very, very little respect remains in my heart for them. Where I dare say I had a fair amount of respect still for Hogan, even considering everything he did and said. You know. And if you're a Black audience member or listener, and you know, I hope you're okay with how I spoke about him, you know, because I know how he affected a lot of people, and some of the things he did and said offended many. So I want to be certain to, you know, anything that I say about Hogan doesn't add any offense to them at all. You know, just try to be as honest as I can. It's hard. It's hard to put all these things together and think about them and then say them. So I really did my best, guys. I really did. And thank you so much for being here this afternoon on the podcast. I'm getting a text message. Is it work telling me to get my ass in there, man? We busy. Okay, all good there. All right, guys. Sorry for checking a text message right as I'm walking out the door here, but I appreciate you being here this afternoon. This is a wild one. We had a lot to discuss in terms of Hulk Hogan, and thank you for just being a part of this really significant podcast. And we all knew there would be a day when we would be here talking about this, and today was that day. So thanks for your support. Thanks for always listening. Thanks for being here. Do me a favor, if you haven't hit that thumbs up button yet, do that as you leave. And join us tomorrow night for SummerSlam 1995. We're going to watch that, take a little bit of break from Hulkamania and, you know, just detach for a bit and just try to think about something else since it's been Hogan for the last 72 hours. And we'll kick back, hang out tomorrow night. Should be a lot of fun. Enjoy what's left of your Saturday night. Have a great one. And thank you so much for being here today. Can't wait to hang out with you again tomorrow night. Peace, brother.